Well, hi. Welcome to another edition of Inside Cottonwood. I am Ron Corbin, Cottonwood City Manager, and I have a couple guests today. Sitting next to me, I have Kirsten, Lennon, who's our Finance Director, Budget Manager, Utilities Billing Manager boss, and whatever else we kind of need to have done. She's been with the city for a long time, but she's here with us today to talk about the budget. And then we have in another location far across the city, we have Rudy Rodriguez, our Deputy City Manager. So welcome, Rudy. How are you doing?
Doing well, doing well. Thank you for having me today.
I'm glad to have you to help explain some of this stuff. It is a budget time. We're actually late to the budget. So we have the budget people, the people that understand the numbers a whole lot better than I do here to help explain. So we're kind of late into the game this year, Kirsten and Rudy. And that's because if you hadn't heard, we shut the city down for a couple, the governor, I guess we should say, shut the city down for a few weeks, has rearranged our budget numbers, and we kind of had to start over. So kind of before we get into the budget, Kirsten and Rudy, what do you guys, how did the COVID-19 pandemic affect our budget process? Normally we start in October, November, and we go through and we're ready in front of council already, and we're well along our way. So we're a little late. So Kirsten, we'll start with you. How has it changed the city's response to creating and developing a budget?
Well, we had sort of already had a budget developed, and we're working on our revenue projections, and then everything shut down. So then we have to relook at all of our revenue projections and see how that's going to affect where we're going to end up for the year, and how we think it's going to affect next fiscal year's budget, because what happens now carries over into next fiscal year. So we had to totally reformulate all of our revenue projections and start from scratch, and then go back and look at the expenditures that we had started to budget and cut back or transfer them from one year to another to try to make it all balance.
Very good. So if I heard correctly, so I think it was like the end of February, we were planning a surplus budget.
Yes.
Is that true?
Our sales tax figures were up approximately 7% in February from what we had received last year, and we had only budgeted a 2% increase. So we were looking pretty good. It was going to be a better year for us, and we would have been able to do a lot more projects and, get things done that we were hoping to do. And then we had to take a step back and relook at that and develop it.
And so we were going to implement the council's directions and their priorities, infrastructure projects, roads, streets, sidewalks, parks and rec, all those things. And we had to kind of start over.
Yeah.
And so we'll get into more details here in a minute. But I think one of the main points I'd like to talk about that 7% being ahead into February is the economy was great. The economy was solid. We were moving in a positive direction. People were working. People were visiting our stores and restaurants, and the real estate. It was going very well. So it's one of the reasons that I think when you see what we budgeted, we didn't have to go cut too much. Really, comparatively speaking to some of our other neighbors, is we were doing well, and we think we're posed as an organization, as a community, to respond well and come back quicker than maybe some other areas. So the underlying base budget and the underlying structure was doing very well. So that's good to hear. Rudy, for your perspective, Rudy, what do you think COVID-19 did to our budget planning process?
Well, first of all, I think it made it very chaotic here. For being here almost 2 decades, this is probably the most dramatic change we've seen in such a short period of time. Since I've been here nearly 2 decades, we've had a couple of downturns in that time, roughly about 10-year cycles, but you normally see them coming. So you have time to prepare. In this particular case, it was totally different. It was almost overnight. We're shutting down businesses. We're shutting down, you have a lot of offices and stuff. So it was a big change, very, very quick. So we had to move really, really quick to get things done. Unfortunately, we still don't have numbers from our state that we'll be talking about a little bit later on, which made it a little bit more difficult. I think Kirsten did a good job of trying to come up with some reasonable conservative numbers for them. We'll touch base on those. But overall, the budget is a flexible budget. It has, and we'll talk about it later on, but it has room to grow if we do better than we predicted. And it also has ways to go ahead and absorb if we take a few losses. So overall, I think what we've done, to Kirsten's credit, is that she's done a really good job of being conservative, not getting too far out there, and trying to do the best with something that wasn't readily available. As in past years, like I said, you see a trend going down, you have a chance to make predictions. In this particular case, we spiraled down real quick, and now we're trying to figure out exactly whether our numbers are on. I think she's done a good job of putting those numbers together. So, and like I said, it was so sudden, so quick, and it was really not expected as quickly as it did happen.
Thank you, Rudy. Yeah, I do think we've responded conservatively. We have a very fiscally conservative council, but flexible is the key. So let's get right into it. We have a slide that kind of shows the overall budget, our numbers. And so, Kirsten, I'll let you talk briefly. The two highlights, I think, are the general fund and then the overall fund. They went in different directions, and not everybody understands that. So can you kind of help us out with that?
Well, the general fund is down 1.74% from last fiscal year's budget. And that was due to some reduction in staff and some things that happened before this happened. We had already been working on making our staffing model a little more realistic and trying to get costs down. We had really cut back on a lot of things. So it's down 1.74, but the overall budget is up by 4%. And that's due to some increase in capital for water and wastewater. There's some construction projects that are budgeted. It's also some carryovers from streets from fiscal year 20 to 21 that didn't get finished, that will hopefully get finished in 21. And then we also increased our water and wastewater rates in, this will be increased as of July 1st. So that increases those budgets as well. And it is a balanced budget at $79 million.
Very good. To recap, the increases, a lot of those projects were already budgeted, money's already set aside. We weren't able to complete them, or actually some of them we decided to put on hold to make sure that we had cash in the bank through this crisis, through the pandemic. And we hope to pick those up July 1, resources available as long as the money gets there. The other part you mentioned was, or that has been mentioned, was our state shared revenues. We don't have the numbers in exactly. So we budgeted conservatively. Don't know if we'll have those numbers to show for our slideshow, but we did a conservative budgeting on those. We have begun to get hints from the state that the gas tax, what we call the HERF fund, which pays for our maintenance crews, our road maintenance crews, road projects, street projects, we expect to take a pretty significant dip this year. So a lot of the stuff that we're going to continue, that the community will continue to see, because there's a bunch.
Yes.
There's a lot of projects that the community will begin to see. We just, they're finishing up a chip seal in one neighborhood. We have a road diet. We have Mingus Road to be finished this next year. We have some more sidewalks. Council has asked us to add a couple more sidewalks to our list for next year. So we've actually got a lot of road projects going on from money that was assigned this year, and what little bit we plan to set aside to work on for next year. Is that fair?
That's fair.
All right. So I think it's time for our first break, or maybe over. So when we come back, I want to talk about the general fund and talk about some of those departments. But then I want to look also at our sales tax. And I think showing our expected sales tax is a good way for the community to understand where we're at financially. So we'll be right back to talk about the general fund and our sales tax revenues.
This is Bruce Morrow, Transportation Manager for Cottonwood Area Transit. Remember, we cover the entire Verde Valley and Sedona. Cottonwood Area Transit has you covered wherever you want to ride in the Verde Valley, all day, every day. Take Cottonwood Area Transit through Clarkdale, Verde Village, and from 26 locations in Cottonwood. With Verde Links, it's a quick and easy trip to Sedona every day. Don't forget our connectors to Camp Verde. Visit cottonwoodaz.gov for Cottonwood Area Transit and take a seat. Let's go ride.
There are people who struggle with addiction and homelessness. Sometimes it may feel like there is nothing we can do to help.
But there is. You can make a tax-deductible donation and help those in need transition away from homelessness. When you give someone a handout, you could actually be supporting an addiction.
A better life starts with better health, especially for those living in the streets.
Support solutions, not addictions. You can make a difference. Visit cottonwoodcares.org.
Welcome back to this edition of Inside Cottonwood. I'm Ron Corbin, your Cottonwood City Manager. Kirsten, Lennon, our Finance Director, and
our municipal court, and then our legal services that we have.
okay, so 45, almost half of our budget
Half
goes
of our
right
budget.
into public safety. So that leaves very little for admin and finance and HR and Parks and Rec and all those other departments. Because I did notice that general services is about 31%, and that includes admin, HR, those kinds of positions to keep the city running. What is always interesting, and if anybody looks at our budget, there's a couple things that stand out to me, and so I just want to point those out. Is the in the general services, the city council's budget, huge, $5.3 million. So people say, oh, the council has $5.3 million they can spend. That's not the case.
No, we have to budget our reserves. So if we have any money that we want to set aside to get a zero balance budget, you budget the reserves. And we currently have in reserves what we call a 16.67% or 60-day coverage for expenditures from the previous year, which is $3.5 million right there. So we set aside $3.5 million in case something were to happen. Now that $3.5 million is not cash. It's cash and liquid assets. So assets that we could easily sell or RFP or do whatever we need to do to get rid of them and get that cash on hand. And then we also have a couple other reserves, including some reserves from the half-cent sales tax that council approved 2 years ago that they designated that we needed to set aside for reserves or for projects.
Yeah, Rudy, you've been with the city, like you said, a few years. Let's just leave it at that. And you've seen this council really talk about building those reserves. You and Kirsten were both here when they added the half-cent sales tax to add that. So for reserves, I know there's been talk in the past about trying to increase that 16% policy. How important are reserves, and how does that help the city overall?
Well, the reserves are actually very important. Over the years, the last few years, we've talked about raising that 16.6% to about 25%, which would be ideal for our community. The 16.6 is a Government Finance Officer Association rule of thumb for a community our size. But what is important about trying to raise our reserves is that when and if the time comes that we need to borrow money to leverage a big project, city hall or a park improvement that's large, it goes a long way to helping us get a better interest rate when we go out for any kind of borrowings. Right now, I don't think we're in really bad shape. Our ratings are really good, but we're not up there to the A++ area. A lot of it has to do is we're limited on our reserves. You may recall during the last down economy we were real fortunate to have large reserves. We did pay for a wastewater treatment plant, cash. We did a lot of projects. So we went and bought a lot of capital that we needed. But since then, we've been slowly building up our reserves. And unfortunately, we haven't gotten to where we want to. But this last year, our council's directive was to go ahead and start to put some money aside. And that 5% that we raised recently has been doing precisely what the council and this community really needs, is putting more money in the piggy bank for the future, because eventually we will go ahead and need it. The neat thing about the current budget that we have is it still continues to put money into that piggy bank for the future. So we're in relatively good shape at this point. And we're going to continue to follow those policies to make sure that we're strong as we move forward.
Awesome, thank you. I agree. So that brings up a subject. We talk about reserves and where we were a few years ago. Kirsten put together a beautiful slide on debt. So there's a yellow and green slide that talks about debt service ending in 2020. And it seems to me that we're in the right direction. We're going down. You guys have been paying those bills on time and making great headway with less debt.
Yes, and we did refinance several of them a few years ago, which got us a better interest rate, which means lower debt. And we will have one that is coming due soon it's relative, to expire in 2027. So
well,
that's soon.
You and I will probably still be here,
Yes.
council, Lord willing.
Yes.
We still get to be here, so very good. So no, I just like to share that because I think it's a good thing. It shows the conservativeness of our council and our desire not to add any new debt and to get those things paid off.
And we did build a wastewater treatment plant and no new debt.
No new debt. Yes, it was very good. So on the next slide, we talk a little bit about reserves, and Rudy beat us to the punch on that one. So I appreciate that, Rudy. But the council did increase the sales tax not too long ago. And we followed their direction that they gave at the time. And we continued to put money away into our reserves that you can see there. Another $500,000, a little more into streets. And then we have general fund reserves of another $362,000 there. So we continue. We did not have to alter course from council's direction on that. So that's pretty exciting that they've been able to do that. So on the 2 slides after this one, there's a pie chart. And this is kind of what I was talking about before we went to break. And so we'll start on this and then we'll finish up when we come back from our break. But this is really where the city gets their money. And this is very telling because every city's got a different story. Sedona's pie chart looks very different than our pie chart. And we have some unique things in our community that make this viable. But Kirsten, can you take a minute and just tell us where we get our sales tax revenue from?
So the majority of our sales tax revenue is from retail sales. So that's our big stores, all the retail down in Old Town and all across town, and then auto sales. And then we also get a large portion, 17%, for our food from home for home consumption. So that's all the grocery stores here in town that sell food for home consumption. So it totals about 70% of our sales tax coming in from those 2 things. And then we have a 9% that comes from bars and restaurants, and about 3% hotel motel, which is not a large amount compared to like Sedona, which that is their major revenue source, one of their major revenue sources.
But we are moving forward with the new hotel, so
Yes.
hopefully that number will go up a little bit once that opens up. So
and we don't have a property tax that comes
No.
to the city, so that we don't have that revenue. We have this sales tax revenue as our revenue.
So we provide fire,
We provide
Parks and
fire.
Rec, of course, public safety, the police officers, all of that stuff with no property tax.
Yes, and a library.
And a library.
And
Not many
airport.
small communities offer library
No.
services Usually it's a great service provided by our community. Transit is supported out of the general fund, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So, you know, given a small population of 12,000, we are fortunate enough, though, to have some big stores and a lot of activity in our small hometown stores that allow us to do things that other cities our size couldn't do. Transit, library, parks and rec, or recreation center, and all those kinds of things. So I'm fortunate to be invited to work in this community a year and a half now ago, and it's a beautiful thing. So one of the reasons I really like it is visitors help pay those bills, which is very nice. So we're gonna go to another quick break, and when we come back, I want to touch on a couple more things, including your projections for sales tax revenue over the next few years, and then maybe we'll wrap up with some big changes that we made here at the city, or some projected asks of city council if they approve the budget here coming up. So when we get back, we'll look at our projections and next steps for the city budget.
This is Bruce Morrow, Transportation Manager for Cottonwood Area Transit. Remember, we cover the entire Verde Valley and Sedona. Cottonwood Area Transit has you covered wherever you want to ride in the Verde Valley, all day, every day. Take Cottonwood Area Transit through Clarkdale, Verde Village, and from 26 locations in Cottonwood. With Verde Links, it's a quick and easy trip to Sedona every day. Don't forget our connectors to Camp Verde. Visit cottonwoodaz.gov for Cottonwood Area Transit and take a seat. Let's go ride.
There are people who struggle with addiction and homelessness. Sometimes it may feel like there is nothing we can do to help.
But there is. You can make a tax-deductible donation and help those in need transition away from homelessness. When you give someone a handout, you could actually be supporting an addiction.
A better life starts with better health, especially for those living in the streets.
Support solutions, not addictions. You can make a difference. Visit cottonwoodcares.org.
Welcome back to this edition of Inside Cottonwood, talking about the Cottonwood City budget with our Finance Director, Kirsten Lennon, and our Deputy City Manager, Rudy Rodriguez. So thank you, gentlemen and lady, for joining me on this and helping explain this to our community. So I want to stay now, and then we can say at the end also, but today is Wednesday, the 27th, I believe, right? We are having an open house tonight. It was in the paper this weekend. 5:30 to 6:30 at our Cottonwood Clubhouse. Anybody can come down and talk to us. We'll be there to answer questions that they might have, specifics about the budget. So, and then even after this show, even after tonight, you can always give City Hall a call, and I would be happy to talk to anybody about the budget. And I know that both Rudy and Kirsten would be willing to do the same. So don't hesitate to reach out to City Hall if you have concerns, questions, or comments about the budget. It should go to council in June.
For the tentative?
For the tentative, June 16th, if I remember correctly, and then July 7th. Yes, for the approval of the final budget. So excited about that. So let's dive right into your projections, your crystal ball, your future telling there. And so we have a slide, a beautiful bar graph that talks about sales tax, and this year or next year's budget year FY21 isn't as long as the others. Yes. What happened?
Basically, when projecting sales tax, even for this year, we had to look at what this closing of the state would do to our revenues and what that means with people losing their jobs and with people being on unemployment and sales tax and shopping and everything. So I projected that we would be down by the end of the year for fiscal year 20, we would be down about 1.5% below what we were last year, and then also down another 3% for next year. So less sales tax revenues coming in means we have to lower expenses. So that is where we based what we based our budget on.
Most of our expenses come out of the general fund that we have more control over. So we're expecting less sales, less revenue, and so we budgeted accordingly. Now, I do have a question. I've talked to some of my peers, and I'm sure you've talked to many of your peers. How are we compared to others when making this projection? Did everybody else budget 3%?
No.
Oh.
A lot of other cities budgeted a much larger drop in their revenues or a much larger drop in any source of revenue because of this downturn and being larger cities. I didn't think that it needed to be quite as extreme. We seem to be doing pretty good, even though I do think things are going to go down. People in Cottonwood are still shopping. They're still out, going out to dinner. I actually went to dinner this weekend and had to wait for 2 hours.
Oh.
So,
Right.
So
we're doing better than some.
We're doing better than some. I still do think it's going to be, it might be a tough year, but I think that we'll be okay in the long run. So
I want to talk briefly about some of the recommendations that we made to council to move forward to. And so, Rudy, you've seen the budget go up and down depending on the circumstances. So we did not make a whole lot of increases. We've eliminated, I think, 4 full-time positions, 1 part-time position. We also, unfortunately, had to furlough some employees. Very, very sad. The good news is the follow-up I've done is most that were eligible have been able to get their unemployment benefits. We continued providing health benefits to those folks while they were furloughed and those kinds of things. So you mentioned that the budget was flexible. Rudy, when you say flexible, if things are better than we expect, than we are budgeting, how will that affect our movements in this next year?
One of the things we've always done in our budget is we have a grants fund that we have always kept about $500,000 in for any potential grants that might come up. Occasionally, we've had issues where we apply for a grant that wasn't originally planned in when we did the budget process, and we want to make sure that we have the budget authority. In Arizona, if you don't have the budget authority, regardless of the monies that come in, you cannot spend. So we always keep a buffer of about $500,000. This year, what we did was we went ahead and increased that to $1 million, just in case our projections are too conservative and we are able to get some sort of a windfall. I wouldn't say, maybe not a windfall, but little additional revenues. On the flip side of that, should it not be, if we are not as conservative as the numbers come in, we also have the option to go ahead and set aside some of our projects in order to go ahead and weather any kind of storm. So I think we're in a really good spot right now where we have the flexibility to go down if revenues don't come in the way we expected, and we have the opportunities to work on other projects if more money comes in during the year. Of course, we hope that it's more money coming in and we can do more projects for our local community.
All right, Rudy, so thank you for that. So flexible budget. Kirsten, we follow direction. Council sets the policy and their priorities. How do you think we did on hitting their priorities from the years you've been working here in our current council? Do you think we hit the mark, or?
I think we hit the mark. We did our reserves, which was really a push that we've gotten from our council. We're still lowering our debt. We're still able to do streets projects that we had projected and had been planning to do. So I think we did a good job of doing what our council directed us to do with what we have.
With money we have. So streets, sidewalks, Parks and Rec, we're still maintaining all those. We continue to look for opportunities. The other thing is that for that grant money, periodically we sell stuff.
Yeah.
So we're hoping to sell a piece of property on 6th Street and 89A. Hopefully that'll close here soon for the hotel, and we'll be able to have that money in that grant spot until council decides where to go. We continue to add to our reserves. So even during this tough budget, we added to our cost savings and kept employee costs down. The other thing that we have in there is we got a lot of requests for equipment. We have a lot of old cars and old trucks and old vehicles. We have old radios. So the city actually has a need, because we're an employer, just like every other company. And so we need to make sure that our employees have safe vehicles, safe working equipment, that our police officers have the right equipment, good radios. So we were able to still budget many of those items, or we put them in this phased in approach. So if the economy does do better, we can reach out and do those, and maybe work on employee compensation or work on capital requests. That's the flexibility that I think is really, really neat about this. The one thing that comes to mind is we need some work on our public safety radios.
Yes.
And we were able to put money aside to that to make sure that our officers are as safe as can be. So while this was not the budget we envisioned in February, it seems to be better than some other cities that we've talked with and spoken with. And it seems to be heading in the right direction of increasing reserves and managing costs and really focusing on our infrastructure in our systems. So, Rudy, before we end this wonderful time here together, anything you want to add?
The only thing I would add is that I think we're positioned very well for this next year. We have reserves. We have some reserves in the bank. We have great projects coming on board. Right now, I think we are, like I said, poised very well to handle whatever comes this next coming year. I'm really excited for what's going on. I'm ready to see some of our projects that we put off this year to next year to begin working, to start working. I think it really is, even though it's been a bit rough the last few months, I think it's pretty exciting times, and I think the public is going to see a lot of great things happen over the next year to 18 months.
I agree. I think in the next couple of Inside Cottonwoods, we'll be able to come in and talk about some of the great projects that not we're doing, but we're supporting that communities, that business owners are doing out there. I probably can't endorse any one business, but Belfry Breweries is on its way. They're making great strides here in Old Town. I can't wait to taste some of their brews. Just a project after project of businesses investing in Cottonwood, and I'm glad that we're here able to support them. Kirsten, last words.
I'm just, thankful that I had the opportunity to come on here and talk about the budget. I love talking about the budget, by the only person. And I think that we have a good, solid budget, and I think that it'll end up being a good year. And like we said, it's flexible. So if things turn out better than I anticipated, which I hope it does, then we'll be able to do some of those wonderful projects for the community.
Awesome. Excited. I'm Ron Corbin, Cottonwood City Manager. We'll see you next time on Inside Cottonwood.